I turned the lock on the bathroom door and listened. Nothing but the hum of the old fridge in the kitchen and the occasional groan of the house settling. Silas had left early, or maybe he was sleeping off another night of whatever poison he drowned himself in. Either way, I had a few minutes alone. That was enough. The mirror didn't lie. My cheekbone had gone from purple to yellow, the kind of sickly color that made you think of something rotting. My lip had split again. I dabbed it gently with a cloth before reaching for the powder, brushing it on with the same care I used every morning, as if the ritual might make me feel human again. A touch of lipstick, soft pink, more to cover than to beautify. I adjusted the collar of my blouse to hide the bruise near my collarbone. My fingers trembled. Years of arthritis made the buttons harder each day, but this wasn't the kind of pain I could complain about. Folks don't like complaints, especially not from women like me. They say bless your heart and walk away faster than they came. I stepped back from the mirror. I didn't recognize the woman staring back, but I gave her a smile anyway. One of those polite, careful smiles. I picked up my worn rosary from the sink, slipped it into my pocket, and opened the door. The smell of burnt coffee hit first. Then his voice, already angry, already awake. Silas used to laugh in the mornings. I still remember how his small hand fit inside mine as we walked to church. He'd skip every few steps, tugging me along with that crooked smile he got from his father. After Daniel passed, it was just the two of us. I was 29, a widow with no college degree, and a 4-year-old boy who thought the moon rose just for him. I told myself I'd give him everything, no matter the cost. And I did. I gave up the scholarship offer I had saved in a drawer since high school. Sold the piano I hadn't touched since Daniel proposed. Stopped answering the phone when friends from choir called. I worked breakfast shifts at the diner and cleaned motel rooms in the evenings, laundry by night, groceries on discount. Sunday was the only day I didn't carry something heavy except the ache in my back and the worry in my chest. When Silas was 8, I saved for 3 months to buy him a bike. He hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would crack. When he was 12 and wanted to quit church, I didn't argue. I thought maybe this is how boys grow. Maybe I'm holding too tight, but the slipping started slow. First it was the silence, then the anger, then the broken plates and the eyes that didn't look at me anymore. He stopped calling me mama after he turned 19. It became you, then old woman, then problem. People said he took Daniel's death hard, but I did too, and I didn't turn cruel. He drank lost jobs, blamed everything on someone else, usually me. You held me back, he once spat after failing a job interview. You raised me in your own sad little world. I stood there, wiping my hands on a dish towel, staring at the boy I gave my life to, and realized he meant it. That night, I cried in the closet so he wouldn't hear. Still, I stayed. Because he was my son. Because somewhere buried under all that bitterness was the little boy who used to bring me dandelions wrapped in tinfoil. I don't know when I started locking my bedroom door at night. Maybe the same year I stopped leaving my hairbrush on the dresser. Maybe the year he called me useless and didn't apologize. Maybe the year I stopped expecting he ever would. That morning, as I poured his coffee and placed the chipped mug in front of him, he didn't look up. He just said, "You always were good at playing servant." I swallowed the words rising in my throat and turned back to the sink where steam was already fogging the window. The eggs were rubbery. I knew that before I set the plate down, but he never cared much for taste, only timing. Silas didn't even glance at me. His eyes stayed locked on his phone thumb, scrolling jaw set. "You used to cook better," he muttered, "before you got old and useless." I said nothing. I had long since stopped trying to remind him that I hadn't slept more than 4 hours the night before, or that my hands ached so badly it took me 10 minutes just to peel a potato. He didn't want excuses. He wanted someone to blame. He scraped his fork hard against the plate and shoved the eggs aside. "You know he said not looking up, it should have been you, not him." The words landed like stones, familiar, but never dull. He meant Daniel. He always meant Daniel. My hand brushed the edge of the sink and knocked a plate to the floor. It shattered, and for a second, I froze. Silas stood up too fast, the chair screeching backward. "Are you serious?" he barked. "You can't even hold a damn plate." I bent down slowly, knees stiff, and started gathering the shards, careful not to cut myself. He walked past me, muttering something I didn't quite catch, and slammed the door behind him. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Outside, a lawnmower buzzed down the street. The neighbor's dog barked at nothing. Curtains shifted across the way just a little, but enough to know someone had heard. Someone always did. No one came. I made my way back to my room and shut the door. I didn't lock it. If he wanted to come in, a lock wouldn't stop him. I knelt beside my small table, the one I had turned into an altar, when I realized no one else would pray for me, and lit the stub of a candle. The image of Mary leaned slightly against the wall, chipped and faded from too many years in this house. I pressed the rosary to my lips. Fingers curled around the worn beads and whispered the same prayer I said every morning. Not for escape. Not even for forgiveness. Just for enough strength to make it through the day without disappearing. The flame flickered once, as if answering back, and I let the silence settle into my bones before reaching for my sweater and stepping outside toward the church. It was the last bag of the week, some bruised apples, 2 cans of beans, and a loaf of day-old bread wrapped in thin plastic. I held it close as I walked, taking the same narrow sidewalk toward St. Martha's, the same one I'd walked for over 40 years. My knees argued with every step, but I made it to the base of the church steps before they gave out. The pain wasn't sharp, just sudden. The world tilted, and before I could brace myself, I was down. The bag hit first, scattering apples down the concrete like marbles. I heard someone call out, felt hands, not rough or grabbing, but careful, steady me by the shoulders. "Let me help the man," said kneeling beside me. I looked up, breath caught in my chest. He was weathered, maybe late 40s, maybe more. Tan skin, dark beard shirt rolled at the sleeves. His eyes were soft, but they didn't look away. Not even when he saw the edge of the bruise peeking out beneath my scarf. "You okay?" he asked gently, gathering the cans and fruit into the bag, like he was holding something sacred. I nodded, too ashamed to speak. "You carry more than these bags," he said, his voice low. "I can see it." Before I could respond, he reached into his shirt pocket and handed me a small folded piece of paper. I took it with shaking fingers. When he walked away, I stood there on the steps, still clutching the bag and the note. I opened it, slowly. Psalm 34:18. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." I read it once, then again, and again, as if the words might change. But they didn't. They just sank soft and heavy somewhere between my throat and my chest. Inside the church, the light from the stained glass scattered across the pews. I sat in the back, hands still holding the paper, the groceries forgotten at my feet. I didn't see him again that morning, but something about the way he said it. I can see it stayed with me like the heat of a hand long after it's gone. I folded the verse and slipped it into my coat pocket before heading home, not realizing I'd see him again the very next day. The knock came just after 10. I'd barely finished sweeping the front porch, more out of habit than purpose. Most mornings passed in silence, broken only by the groan of the wood beneath my feet and the occasional bark from the neighbor's hound. But this knock wasn't like the others. It was patient, steady, almost respectful. I opened the door just a crack and saw him, same sun-worn boots, same steady eyes. In his hands, a paper sack and something wrapped in cloth. "I thought you might not have eaten yet," he said. "The bakery down the road had these fresh this morning." I looked past him down the empty street, then back to his face. I should have said no. Silas had made it clear, no strangers, no visits, no explanations. But I didn't close the door. Instead, I asked, "What's your name?" "Malachi," he said. "Malachi Rivera." He nodded toward the gate hanging loose on its hinges. "That thing's been leaning for a while. I could fix it, if that's all right." I didn't know why I stepped aside. Maybe because no one had asked to do something for me in years. Maybe because the bread smelled warm through the cloth. Or maybe because of the verse I hadn't stopped reading since yesterday. "You don't have to do this," I said softly. He smiled, setting the sack gently on the porch. "God didn't send me to rescue you, just to stay." He went to work without another word, pulling tools from a pouch at his side like it was the most natural thing in the world. I watched from the porch chair, the bread untouched in my lap, my heart confused by the quiet way he moved. That's when I heard the car. The tires crunched the gravel louder than usual. The door slammed harder. Silas's boots stomped louder than any hammer Malachi held. He froze at the gate eyes narrowing. "Who the hell are you?" he snapped. Malachi stood up slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Just helping with the gate." Silas stepped closer. "This is my house. You don't fix a damn thing without asking me first." I could feel my ribs tighten, waiting for the storm. Malachi didn't flinch. I asked her. They stared at each other, the air between them thick as glass about to break. Then Silas scoffed and stormed inside, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Malachi picked up his tools, nodded once to me, and said, "I'll come back tomorrow. That gate still leans." And just like that, he was gone again. But the air inside the house didn't settle for hours. The shouting started just after midnight. I'd heard the bottle cap hit the floor hours earlier, followed by the slow, heavy footsteps of Silas, moving from the kitchen to the living room and back again. He hadn't touched dinner. I hadn't dared ask why. From behind my door, I listened as his voice rose and fell, arguing with someone who wasn't there. Sometimes it was my name he spat. Sometimes it was his father's. Sometimes just slurred curses I didn't recognize. I waited until the house fell silent before I crept toward the bathroom. The floor was cold against my feet. I turned on the dim light and closed the door behind me. My head felt light. My hands trembled as I reached for the faucet. The mirror blurred. My knees buckled. I tried to reach the sink for balance, but my arm gave out. I fell sideways, my hip hitting the edge of the tub, my head striking the floor. Pain flared, then dulled, then faded. I remember thinking, not like this. Not here. And then nothing. When I opened my eyes again, the world was spinning. There were lights above me too bright to make sense of. Voices, movement, a siren far away. But the only thing that mattered was the hand wrapped around mine. Warm, steady, familiar. "It's all right now," Malachi whispered. "You're not alone anymore." I blinked. His face came into focus, slowly blurred at the edges like a dream I'd had before. My mouth was too dry to speak. My body felt weightless and heavy at once. Later they told me what happened. That Malachi had come back the next morning like he said he would, and when I didn't answer his knock, he waited. He listened. And something told him it wasn't right. The neighbor across the street, Mrs. Langley, had heard him shouting for me. When he asked for help, she fetched her son, and together they forced the door open. They found me on the bathroom floor, blood trailing from my forehead like a ribbon. My pulse was weak. I was barely breathing. The paramedics said it was a miracle I hadn't slipped away entirely. That if they'd arrived even 10 minutes later, it might have been too late. I don't remember the ride to the hospital, but I remember the feel of Malachi's coat sleeve against my arm as he held my hand in the ambulance. I remember the way he kept whispering, "Stay with me, Inez. Stay." In the quiet hospital room with machines humming and shadows flickering against the wall, I drifted back to sleep, still feeling the shape of his fingers wrapped around mine. And when I woke again, there was something folded neatly on the nightstand beside me, the same piece of paper with the verse he'd given me once before, smoothed flat and placed with care like a promise. They let me rest. For 2 days I slept more than I had in years. Nurses came and went. I ate what I could. Malachi stopped by quietly, always at the same time in the afternoon, sitting in the chair by the window without saying much, just being there. On the 3rd day, I heard voices in the hallway, his and another man's. I closed my eyes, half listening. The voices moved farther down toward the hospital's small chapel. Later, Father Emmett came to visit me. He sat by my bed, his hands folded in his lap, looking at me the way some men look at stained glass, like something fragile that had survived heat and pressure. Malachi told me a story, he said gently. Said you wouldn't remember it. But he did. I nodded, unsure what to expect. He said he was 9. The priest continued living behind a gas station off Highway 23. You found him near the dumpster, gave him a piece of bread and a Bible you carried in your purse, sat with him for 5 minutes, asked his name, told him God hadn't forgotten him. I tried to picture it. I'd handed out a lot of things over the years, sandwiches, socks, scriptures, but I couldn't place his face in that memory. Still, something about it felt true. Something about the way he looked at me when I fell. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition. He said you were the only person who ever looked at him like he wasn't trash, Father Emmett said. That after all these years he came back to this town without knowing why. And then he saw you at the church. I felt something in my chest twist and loosen at the same time. He said, she saved me once. Now it's my turn. The words landed quietly, but I felt them echo inside me. I didn't remember the moment, but I understood what it meant. Sometimes the kindness you plant blooms long after you've forgotten the soil. When Father Emmett left, I stared at the ceiling, letting the stillness settle around me. I could still hear Malachi's voice in the hallway, speaking low and certain to someone who wasn't me. And I knew without needing to ask that he'd be back tomorrow. The shelter wasn't much. Just a converted house on the edge of town, with creaky floors, soft lights, and too many memories soaked into the walls. But it was quiet. And it was safe. For the first time in years, I slept through the night without waking to footsteps or slammed doors. They gave me a room of my own and a small wooden dresser. Inside the top drawer, I kept a tin of thread and an old sewing hoop someone had left behind. I hadn't sewn in years. My hands weren't as steady as they once were, but the motion came back like an old hymn, familiar if slower. The women here were kind in their own wounded ways. Some came in angry, some didn't speak at all. But grief has a way of making strangers into sisters, and after a while, we learned to sit in circles without needing to explain why. One morning, I found myself teaching Carmen, barely 20, with eyes too tired for her age, how to thread a needle. She cursed under her breath, laughing when the thread slipped again, and I laughed too, surprised by the sound of my own voice. That afternoon, 3 more joined us. By the end of the week, we had a basket full of crooked stitches and shared stories. I didn't tell mine all at once. Just pieces. A memory here, a name there. I let the silence hold the parts I couldn't yet say. But each time I pulled the needle through the cloth, it felt like I was stitching something back into place. I started a new piece on a clean square of linen. It took weeks, my hands ached, my eyes blurred, but I kept going, one careful line at a time. When it was done, I hung it beside my bed. God doesn't delay. He stitches on his own time. Malachi saw it the next time he visited. He read it once, then again, like he was letting it sink beneath his skin. "That's yours?" he asked. I nodded. He smiled, small and quiet. "Then I think he's right on schedule." I didn't answer. I just picked up the hoop again and began to stitch the next one. Silas started coming every day. At first he kept to the background, carrying boxes, fixing what was broken, sweeping the porch steps, without being asked. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, but when he did, his voice was softer than I remembered. Malachi took him under his wing without question, taught him how to organize the pantry, how to speak gently to women whose voices had been taken for too long. One afternoon, I saw them praying together in the garden, heads bowed like old friends. Silas asked me to teach him how to embroider. His stitches were clumsy at first, but he didn't give up. He said it helped quiet the noise in his head. One day, I looked over and saw him threading the needle without shaking. We laughed together again, real laughter. The kind that comes from letting go, not pretending. I hadn't heard my own laughter in years, and now it came back like breath. When his first embroidery was finished, he hung it in the front hallway. The fabric was uneven, the thread pulled too tight in places. But the words were clear. The angel you waited for was a boy you already saved. And somehow I knew he had saved me too. The sun was warm through the branches as I stitched the final line. Silas sat beside me, his Bible open in his lap, murmuring verses to himself, slow and careful, like he was still learning to speak them aloud. I reached up and brushed my fingers along the scar near my cheekbone. It had faded, but not disappeared. I didn't want it to. It was proof of what I'd survived, and somehow what I'd found. I traced it gently and smiled, not from hurt, but from memory. Some miracles don't fall from the sky. Some walk in wearing dusty boots and carrying nothing but a bag of bread and a verse that lands exactly where it needs to. Some don't knock loudly. They wait quiet until you're ready to open the door. I listened to Silas turn a page beside me. The sound of it was steady, real. The kind of sound you forget you ever longed to hear until it's back again. I set my sewing aside and closed my eyes beneath the lemon tree. For once there was nothing I needed to brace myself against. No voice I had to fear. Just the soft rhythm of breath and the stillness of a heart that had finally found rest.